My name's Bree Salter. I'm the Production and Research Hatchery Manager here at DEI, and I'm from Voluntown, Connecticut. So a hatchery in our context is a place where all of the bivalves are grown. So we take adult animals and spawn them and make a bunch of little babies so that they can be used for education, research, and commercial use. Here at the Down East Institute, we culture several different species of bivalves for both farming use and education and research use. So a lot of the mussels and the oysters that we produce are being sold to farmers so that they can grow up that seed into adults and sell them and make profit off of them. The term seed is used for bivalves because it's a term that's used to indicate that they're, first of all, tiny little babies, and second of all, you're planting them somewhere and hoping that they grow up and survive. So this is our broodstock area where we condition our clams, mussels, and oysters. The term broodstock is also used in other animal husbandry businesses, so they use it for like livestock on farms and things like that. It just means an adult animal that we're looking to make babies from.
Hi everyone, my name is Annie Fagan. I'm a Marine Extension Associate with Maine Sea Grant. So if we're looking at this whole life cycle, for oysters, in the hatchery, everything starting from the adults, which in the hatchery we call broodstock, so those are males and females that are bred specifically to have traits that are great for oysters like resistance to disease, strong growth, strong shells, things like that. They're spawning them in the hatchery. So spawning refers to the process where the shellfish is releasing its eggs or its sperm. They can get them to do that in the hatchery by cranking up the heat slowly on the tanks over time, feeding them food, things like that. And then in the hatchery, they'll see the fertilized eggs, they'll monitor those, they're putting them in tanks, and they're nurturing them all the way through this settlement stage. So as the oysters get bigger, they're being fed different types of phytoplankton in the hatchery. They're moving to different systems that are best for that particular size of oyster. And they're also keeping an eye out for ones that aren't doing so well or maybe aren't going to make it, and keeping kind of the best and the brightest of the cohort. This first phase of the life cycle, these guys are super tiny. They're tinier than grains of sand, and they have a little, very thin shell, and they have this organ on the side called a velum, and that actually can help them swim around and find food. So the next stage is still a veliger, free swimming. At this point, they have more control over where they're moving, and you can see their shell starts to get more rounded.
So we can go check out some oyster larvae. So this is our larvae room. We keep our larvae up until 2 weeks in these 400-liter conicals. We stock typically at the beginning at around 8 to 9 million larvae per conical. And every 2 days we drain the animals on a fine mesh sieve and move them into a new conical. So these are 2 conicals of oysters that we have going on right now. You actually can see them rafting on the top here a little bit. And then if you look in the water column where my beam of light is, you can see them individually swimming around. So those guys are moving around by themselves. They're very active at this stage, moving around looking for microalgae.
So in this pediveliger stage, they have this pretty round little shell. They have this velum, which helps them swim. They have a foot they're using to crawl around. They have this eye spot they're sensing light with. And these are all body characteristics that are developing to help them set onto something. This next part of the life stage, where they're transitioning into more of a juvenile or teenager stage of life. When I think about metamorphosis and what that means, I think about really dramatic change in body shape or size or characteristics, and usually associated with kind of a transition into a new part of the life cycle for an animal. So a classic example would be a monarch caterpillar kind of wrapping itself up into a chrysalis and then coming out and emerging as a butterfly. Same animal, but totally rearranged. For oysters, that kind of metamorphosis happens during settlement.
After the larvae swim around in the larvae room for 2 weeks, they start to metamorphose into their next stage of life, and that's when we start to prepare their settlement material for them. So for oysters and clams, when they're at the same stage of being ready to settle as the mussels, so when they start to lose that swimming organ and grow a foot, we prepare these downwelling trays for them. So for oysters, we have the trays and we sprinkle in a little bit of culch or ground up oyster shell, and that indicates to the oysters that it's a safe place to settle. And so they'll settle right on that culch, and then after a certain amount of time, we can sieve them off of the culch and move them into the cones that are over there. After the oysters are taken off of the trays, they get sieved and moved into these cones. The cone upweller has 2 pumps in the bottom. One of them is pumping water through each of these cones on both sides here, so that again, all of the oysters are getting food and they're not having the opportunity to settle on each other or the sides of the tanks.
And once they attach to something or settle or set onto a hard substrate, their organs inside like change places and rearrange, which is pretty cool. They lose that eye spot, they lose the foot, they lose the velum. They don't really need those structures anymore. And their shell kind of starts to mimic more the natural shell or adult shell, I guess, of an oyster, and they start to grow really quickly.
So bivalves are filter feeders, so essentially they're sitting still in one spot and just filtering whatever's in the water and using that as nutrition. So whatever can fit through their gills that they're able to convert into energy, they will do. This is our mass production algae room. We grow 11 different species of microalgae, and that's because each of the different species offers a different nutritional content, and bivalves are just like people. They like a diversity of nutrition in their diet, and that's what makes them grow really well and be really healthy. When we first start a culture in here, it looks sort of yellow like this typically, if it's a brown species, and over the course of a few days, it'll darken up to look something like this. We also grow red and green algae, which start off as either a pinkish color or like a light green color.
So you have an oyster and you want to open it to check it out or maybe to eat it. You're gonna need to shuck it. Ah, gorgeous. Here we're looking at a rough diagram of an eastern oyster, which is what we farm and what's native here in Maine. I'm gonna walk us through kind of the basic anatomy of this animal, knowing that a lot of what we're talking about is gonna be similar to other bivalves like mussels or scallops, but sometimes there are differences too. To think about kind of the inner anatomy of the oyster, I like to start on the outside and work my way in. So the first kind of major organ that we're gonna see all along the outside here is the mantle. You can find the mantle by working all the way to the outside of the oyster body and looking for, in this case, it's kind of this darker brown line. The mantle is like the first place that water is passing through when oysters are filter feeding. It's kind of the first tissue that water and that food is running into. The mantle is a really thin layer of tissue. It has glands in it that are taking elements out of the water and converting them into basically the materials that it needs to make its shell. I'm gonna peel the mantle back, and that's gonna give us a really good visual of the gills. The gills are these very thin, like tissue paper thin layers right here. The eastern oyster has multiple sets of gills, so you can actually count them if you're very careful. 1, 2, there's 1 pair of gills. Then we have 3, 4. So 4 total layers, 2 sets of gills in the eastern oyster. This is how an oyster is breathing. It's pulling what it needs out of the water to breathe. And they're also for moving water through the oyster's body.
The gills beat back and forth, the cilia beat back and forth and create water currents. The water flow would then be passing from here through the gills and out. What the gills do is they have mucus on the cilia, and it captures phytoplankton or algae in the water. Those gills have captured the algae, which is its primary food.
Oysters can take in lots of things, but at some point they have to make a choice about what they're gonna swallow and what they're gonna spit back out, which is pretty cool. So this is the point where they're gonna make that choice. Food is going into the labial palps, which is kind of right between these 2 flaps here. It's not exactly a mouth, but it's similar to a mouth because after the food goes through here, it's going to go into the stomach. An oyster might choose to spit something out if it's too big, or it thinks that it's not food, or maybe it's a piece of sand that it doesn't want to swallow. So if it's not going to swallow something, it will wrap it up in mucus and spit it back out. It's called pseudofeces. But if it likes what it's got there, then it's going to swallow it. So it's going to pass through the labial palps and into the stomach, which we can see really well here. Looking at it from the top, this whole kind of big plump area is the guts or the stomach or the belly of the oyster. And it's a stomach that's surrounded by a larger digestive gland. So you can actually see that there's like some brown color here. And if we open it up, it's sort of challenging, then we can get a really good view at the food that the oyster is digesting. You can see that it's kind of brown, dark, maybe a little bit green. That's all that phytoplankton that it's swallowed and that it's digesting right now, which is pretty cool. From there, once it's kind of done digesting its food, that is going to pass out of the digestive gland over here into this very kind of thin tube that you can just barely see there. That's the rectum, and then at the end, of course, we have the anus, and we can see that this oyster is actually in the process of pooping right now, so there's some feces coming right out of the anus. So that's really makes it really easy to find the end of the digestive gland. And then the gonads generally live over here. Some other structures that are great to know about are the heart, and then we also have the adductor muscle. So the adductor muscle is pretty big. For oysters, it makes up usually 20 to 40% of their wet weight. Some shellfish have two adductors, like mussels and clams might have one on either end. Oysters just have one. If you see an oyster in the water and you pull it out, it's always going to close its shell right away if it's alive and healthy, because it wants to protect itself. This trait really varies among bivalves. For example, soft-shell clams have a different way that they feed. They have a siphon that comes out of their shell, and so they don't ever really close their shell all the way completely. Oysters need to be able to close it all the way completely. Scallops are another great example. They have a really big adductor muscle. Actually, the adductor muscle is usually what you're eating when you're eating a scallop.
The most rewarding part of my job is meeting the farmers and the people that I'm directly impacting. So like the mussel farmer in Blue Hill that wouldn't have a business if we weren't able to produce hatchery seed for him. We are constantly innovating and collaborating. Each year we are trying to learn from our successes and mistakes and implement them in a way so that we can produce shellfish even better.